KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Pre-qualification is available at splatero.com.
Welcome back to another edition of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I'm Beth Accomando. My apologies for getting this podcast out a week late, but I had the TCM Classic Film Festival and Real Science 2.0 to cover. But thanks for your patience. I didn't want to skip either the TCM Classic Film Festival or the San Diego Natural History Museum's latest installment of Real Science. So I've combined these two fabulous events for this one podcast. First, the TCM Classic Film Festival. The 2018 festival served up another fantastic year of classic cinema and amazing guests. I'll have a full wrap-up on my Cinema Junkie blog next week, but here are a few highlights. I got to see 16 films and one presentation on trailblazing women animators in 4 days. One film was on nitrate, most were on 35mm, and all were spectacular. The festival takes great care in making sure they show the films in the best way possible. Sometimes that means showing it in the volatile format of nitrate that could spontaneously combust at any moment. Other times it means it's a newly struck print or an archival print from a studio. And other times it's a new digital restoration. Some of the films are well known, like The Producers or George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, while others, like The World's Greatest Sinner, is not available in any format, so only a small cult following that saw it in theaters or on VHS know about it. The festival is a mecca for film lovers, and the care and presentation is well matched by the selection of people to introduce and give context to the films. TCM Noir Alley host Eddie Muller introduced the boxing noir The Setup and had poet Malcolm Mays read the poem that inspired the film, a poem about a black fighter.
Ladies and gentlemen, fighting, rapping, poetizing, out of the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, the pride of South Central, Malcolm Mays.
Pansy had the stuff, but his skin was brown and he never got a chance at the middleweight crown. Mean as a panther, crafty as a fox, he would hit like a mule and he knew how to box. A dark-skinned jinx with eyes like a lynx, a heart like a lion and a face like a sphinx. Battered, flat, massive, grim, always impassive. He was of supple build, graceful, trim, heavy above, with legs slim, compact, neat. Light as a cat on his feet. His neck was solid, his arms were long, his bones were heavy and his hands were strong. And whenever he moved, you could see the light, muscles under his skin, right? He was slick, he was quick, and each movement was like a trick. Inside the ropes, he moved away. This is what we gonna do. He got you nervous, you never knew just what the hell he was gonna do. But he knew all about you. You lead with your left. You hit in there. You throw it in with your right. His shoulder was there. Always an elbow, a wrist, a mitt. He knew what was coming before you hit. He slipped when he couldn't block. His blows were timed like a clock. He'd warm up slow. He'd let you go for maybe a couple of rounds or so, but then he'd start. One left, one right. And you'd wonder who told you that you could fight. Clinch, try and do it. It was over before you knew it. He'd carve you up like a leg of mutton and drop you flat with a sock on the button. I mean, he fought all comers, and he reached his prime, and he stayed there waiting, marking his time. Now was his chance for the title, or never. Each month was vital. When you get that far, you either click, or you hit the skids and you go down quick. His managers swayed. They did what they could. They schemed, they willed, but it did no good. The months slid by, the title hung high, no pansies need apply. Some of the sporting writers, well, they tried to throw their weight on Pansy's side. They waxed sarcastic, biting drastic on the subject of champs that won the crown, and after they got it, then lay down. Come on, Take a sniff at Pansy's glove. What was the champ so scared of? No box office attraction? Hell, we wanted action. But then, sudden disaster. A final hope blaster, the brass-knuckled hand of the law hung a hot one on Pansy's jaw. Dissection of his private life revealed that he had an extra life and 3 squatting brats living like caveats. Not guilty, Pansy pled. Guilty, the jury said. Elections were coming. The judge was firm. Pansy went up for a 5-year term. Time out. 10 years passed. Fighting bodies have gone to grass. Some lie on the grass rotten, even with their names have been forgotten. Fresh blood, new hopes inside the old ropes. Kids that went their short pants 10 years back get their chance. Giving, taking. All champions in the making. A fighter's life is short at best. No time to waste, no time to rest. The spotlight shifts. The clock ticks fast. All youth becomes old age at last. All fighters weaken, all fighters crack. All fighters go, and they never come back. Well, so it goes. Time hits the hardest blows. Thank you guys so much.
Then there were celebrities who came not to promote their own films, but to show their love for films made by others. John Carpenter, who pretty much refuses to talk about his own films these days, presented Howard Hawks' pre-code sensation, Scarface.
Turner Classic Movies has described the movie well in your program. It's perfect, so I'm just going to add a few tidbits tonight. This is based on the life of Al Capone. Obviously, Al Capone had a scar. So does Paul Muni, who plays the title role. Ben Hecht wrote the screenplay. Ben Hecht was a newspaper man. He was a newspaper man in Chicago during the bad old days. So they would put out photographs in the newspaper, and they put X's where the bodies were. So Howard Hawks decided, let's put X's in our scenes. So X's, you'll see them. You can try to find them. I challenge you to find every X. They're in the scene where people have been killed or about to be killed. They are used for foreboding. Scene where Boris Karloff is in, there's an X over him. Shows you what's going to happen to him. He is killed on a bowling alley and he X's a strike. But there's the most incredible X. It's a scene where Paul Muni comes to the door and talks to George Raft. It's an X on each guy. It's a double cross. So let me see if you can find all these. You'll be cool if you can. Okay. The opening shot is a 3.5-minute single take, uninterrupted. Now, for the time this was shot, that is amazing. They didn't have the technology we have today. They didn't have the technology that Martin Scorsese had in Goodfellas, or that I had in Halloween. They had these big giant cameras. So it's a feat to do this shot. Paul Muni's sister in this movie is played by Ann Dvorak. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And there's a lot of incest that's suggested, kind of like the Borgias. Also, she gives a modern performance as an actress. She's just tremendous. Also, she was Howard Hawks' mistress at the time, so maybe that's has something to do with the performance. I don't know. Guys, here you go. Scarface. It's dark, it's brutal, it's blackly funny. Please enjoy.
TCM Film Festival ended on Sunday, and I've had the blues ever since. Fortunately, the San Diego Natural History Museum kicks off their Real Science Season 2 this week to help lift me out of my depression. Real Science pairs an actual scientist with a film so that science fact and science fiction can meet. The museum's purpose in doing this is to find new ways to engage audiences in conversations about science. Pop culture proves to be a brilliant entry point for this. Films such as Back to the Future and The Matrix can make science feel less threatening and more accessible. And then add in a real scientist to point out what the films get right or wrong, and suddenly people are painlessly learning things. The films in the Real Science program screen on Fridays here in San Diego. But with this podcast, you can enjoy the scientific insights of the 4 scientists from anywhere, and you can seek out these films on your own. The scientists will also discuss their particular fields of research and expertise for some insights into what real scientists do. We also talk about other films that you might want to seek out. But if you are in San Diego, I urge you to go see the films so you can actually talk to these scientists in person. First up is Michael Wall, Curator of Entomology and Vice President of Science and Conservation at the San Diego Natural History Museum. This is his second year with Real Science, and he also hosts film series where he does a kind of Mystery Science 3000 take on films and holds running commentaries about the accuracy of the science in films such as Them and Wasp Woman. Wall presents the 1974 film Phase 4, the only film directed by graphic designer Saul Bass. Michael Murphy plays a scientist who is dealing with the ramifications of an unknown cosmic event.
That spring, we were all watching the events in space and wondering what the final effect would be. Astronomers argued over theory, while engineers got pretty excited about variables in magnetic fields. Mystics predicted earthquakes and the end of life as we knew it. When the effect came, it was almost unnoticed because it happened to such a small and insignificant form of life. One biologist, an Englishman, Ernest Hubbs, saw something, got nervous, and started investigating. While I was playing around with number theory at the university, Hubbs was already onto something. Ordinary ants of different species were doing things ants don't do. Meeting, communicating, apparently making decisions. By summer, the rest of the world had moved on to other things. But Hubbs kept making notes while the threat grew.
Michael, this is the second time the Natural History Museum has decided to do this Real Science program. So this is REAL scientists, real scientists, talking about REEL science, real science, in films. So how did that first series go, and what did you kind of learn from that in terms of how to interact with the public in these films?
Yeah, so we did the first series in early 2017, and we were looking for ways to engage with different audiences at the San Diego Natural History Museum, and also to find other community partners to partner up with to sort of get out in the community a little bit more. So we partnered up with the Digital Gym and launched this series, and we were kind of just doing it on a prayer, and it ended up being really successful. We had a lot of positive feedback. I think people really enjoyed the getting to interact with scientists, both, sort of before and after the events, but also just hearing people's takes on these really wild cult sci-fi movies.
Well, and what's interesting too is, as a museum, you might think that you guys would have gone for documentaries or very kind of scientific films that didn't have questionable science in them. But your approach was to go with pop culture films that people would probably know, probably have some sort of connection with, and approach science through that route.
One of the things the museum's in the business of is education, right? And like the best way to educate someone about something is to sort of grab onto something that they're already familiar with and then stretch it out to something that they're unfamiliar with. And so that's what the experiment was. And, as scientists, we have to experiment. So we did it last year, and we did 4 different films, and the data came in, and we were hugely successful.
So for this program, each scientist gets to pick a film that they want to talk about. Now, last year, you picked Flash Gordon, which was was a lot of fun. So now you're moving on to something very different in tone and quality, which is Phase 4. So remind people what Phase 4 is.
Most people probably haven't seen Phase 4. It's a sci-fi movie. I think it was released in 1974. And it's about ants. And it has the feel, particularly when you look at the movie poster for it, it has the feel of a creature feature that, ants are going to invade the world and kill a whole bunch of humans. And that's somewhat the premise of it. But it also has this really weird art house feel to it. It's very contemplative. It kind of reminds me at some levels of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
In the next few moments, we will try to give you an impression of a new kind of film experience. If your curiosity is aroused, you are ready for Phase 4.
I believe that they'll move rather quickly into desert areas, taking over the countryside first, then laying siege to towns and cities. Do you know our plans, our strengths, our weaknesses? Why don't they kill us? What do they want?
How do you fight a force that knows what your next move will be before you think of it?
So what is your approach that you're going to take to it in terms of how you're going to kind of dissect the science of this film?
Right. Well, it's interesting because the movie is about scientists. The two main characters in the movie are scientists. One of them, I think, is like more of how can we kill ants kind of scientist. And the other one is into communication with animals. And so it says that in the premise of it at the beginning, you find out that he had previously worked with orca whales, trying to communicate with orca whales. And so there is science within it, and particularly about trying to communicate with animals. And so my approach is going to be is to talk a little bit about how ants actually communicate with one another and how they sort of spin off of that in this movie.
Little sons of bitches.
No. They're not individuals. They're individual cells, tiny, functioning parts of the whole. Think of the society, James, with perfect harmony, perfect altruism and self-sacrifice, perfect division of labor, organized for preordained roles.
Think of the building of elaborate and complex structures according to plans that they know nothing of, and yet execute perfectly. Think of their ability to evolve and adapt in ways that are so beautiful and still so unknown, and all contained in one simple form, so defenseless in the individual, so powerful in the mass.
Now, entomology is your specialty. Ants have appeared in a number of science fiction films. What do you think about ants makes them appealing to science fiction to use them?
I think definitely it is the mob nature of them, the sort of single mind mob. It's a kind of at some level it's the same reason why I think we find zombies appealing, because they seem to be this mindless mass, but they also can, at least in some movies, move in concert with one another. And so this idea of a mindless horde, I think, is inherently sort of frightening. And it also, it oftentimes symbolizes, I think, in sci-fi movies, in particular, actually, in Phase 4, the way in which we often paint our enemies. So that, like, during the Vietnam War, that communists are a mindless mob in some sort of way. And so it springs off of that sort of fear of that the commune is going to take down democracy,
Do ants get a bad rap in science fiction films, or is science fiction kind of tapping into something about them that is accurate in some way?
In this film in particular, I think obviously they get a bad rap, right? Because there are plenty of like ant invasion movies where they're like, seem to be acting with some sort of vengeance in some sort of way, where we're projecting these human emotions of revenge upon them, or that they're inherently evil in some sort of way. But where this film in particular is really accurate is Well, actually, in the cinematography of it, they got a wildlife photographer to do the filming of the ants, and it's some of the best, actually, footage I've seen of ants in motion. And the amazing thing about it is that they set up these set pieces for these ants to crawl through, and I can't imagine, like, the countless amount of hours. When you see some of these scenes, how they got these ants to do some of these things. I mean, it's almost like they're trained animals, and it's pretty crazy and really awesome.
I understand that this is a film you haven't revisited since you were young. So how has this film kind of changed for you? And going back to it and seeing it again, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I was telling my wife that the last time I saw this movie, I think I was probably about 8 years old, and was probably sitting on like the plush carpet in our den, watching it on a tube TV. And I remember at the time being like, "Wow, this is really weird," And but just it was another sort of. It probably came on a Saturday during a creature feature. I often watch those on the weekends, and we were rewatching it the other night. And as an entomologist, I was really appreciating the cinematography of the ants. And in particular, there is, one ant that is a major character, as weird as that sounds. And they do, I thought, my wife didn't quite agree with me as much as I thought, but they do a really good job of doing a portrait of an ant, like actually giving the ant some personality. Like the ants do feel like actors in this, which is a really very unusual to see. They're props, they're scary things in a bunch of like your standard operating sci-fi movies. But in this, like, there's some emotional resonance that at least I felt, and I think it probably goes back to my background as an entomologist, But I really enjoyed that part of the movie of it, and it was interesting because it is a very contemplative movie. It's not high action, though there are plenty of action scenes in it, but it's not nonstop jump scares and high action. And it was interesting to think about it afterwards, like, okay, so what was the point of that? It made you think,
Do you think that film in any way laid a foundation for you becoming an entomologist?
Boy, that would be an amazing deep cut if I went to counseling and they pulled that out of my memory. But I certainly think that science fiction in general contributed to my path, my professional path, that I was always fascinated with science fiction from a very early age. And I think that imagining the possibilities is part of what science is about.
In terms of all these ant films that there are, is this one of your favorites, or are there some others that you'd want to mention?
Well, I mean, the classic ant film is Them, and that's, of course, the giant ant film from the 50s. It was kind of one of the results of nuclear testing in the Arizona desert. Ants got really big.
By direction of the President of the United States, stay in your homes. I repeat, stay in your homes. Your personal safety, the safety of the entire city, depends upon your full cooperation with the military authorities.
Yes, cities, nations, even civilization itself, threatened with annihilation, because in one moment of history-making violence, nature, mad, rampant, wrought its most awesome creation. For born in that swirling inferno of radioactive dust were things so horrible, so terrifying, so hideous. There is no word to describe them.
That one is probably my favorite, just because it hits all the right notes for me in terms of a creature feature, and it has to do with entomology. It has to do with insects. But I would say, I do quite like this film. It's weird. I'm not gonna mince any words about it. It's really weird, but I really appreciate the portrait that they paint of ants in this film, and the way that it sort of makes at least me think about ants in a different way.
Looking back on it, it seems very much like of the 70s in terms of that kind of, maybe you drop a little acid and think about something in detail and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can totally see plenty of people smoking some reefer, dropping acid and watching this movie and having their minds blown kind of thing, because It definitely hits all those tones. There's some psychedelic-ish sequences in it, some really visually like crazy sequences, particularly the microphotography of the ants. There's a couple scenes that are really wonky with that. And then also the soundtrack for it is this kind of like really stark synth, kind of like bow, 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 you know? And so all of it put together totally has that feel of the 70s.
And it also has a bit of that kind of political consciousness element that was really popular in those films.
Yeah, absolutely. The consensus is that it is sort of a commentary on the Vietnam War at some level, that the ants represent the mindless horde of the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, and that science is trying to like provide an answer for defeating the mindless horde. There's a scene in it that is very symbolic of the use of napalm. So there's undoubtedly a political message behind it as well.
By showing this, what are you hoping to kind of connect with audiences, or what kind of a point do you want to try and make or bring out with this film?
Yeah, well, again, I keep harping on how impressed I am with the footage of the ants in this. And again, to me, this film gives ants personality. And I do, like, when I'm trying to do education about the work that I do, I always say that the species of the world are a cast of characters and they're performing the biggest play on Earth kind of thing. And that telling the stories of nature and making people feel familiar and feel like that they have a connection in some way with nature is a path to conservation at some level. And so I think this movie does a really good job of personifying ants, and some people might go, yeah, it personified them as evil, But I think other people will look at it and make a connection somewhat with ants. And if in my presentation at the beginning of it, where I'm sort of contextualizing the movie and contextualizing ant communication, I can sort of nudge that over the top, then I think I'll have achieved my goal.
Insects do seem to be very popular in science fiction. Do insects have like different personalities that attract them in different ways to science fiction writers? Because ants seem to be used, like you see giant ants in a number of films, but like something like a tarantula always seems to be popular, not necessarily in science fiction only, but it's like, it's big, it's furry, it's kind of scary, and people seem to turn to that. But do bugs have like certain personality types that lead them in different ways to science fiction?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you just think in your mind through the different groups of insects, you're automatically going to have some sort of like visceral reaction, and it could be in a positive way. Like generally when people think about butterflies, they go, oh, butterflies, kind of thing. But when people think about roaches, or they think about like maggots or flies, they have another reaction. And spiders are one that, I mean, there's a movie all about arachnophobia, right? It's well acknowledged that is something that causes a great deal of fear in people. So get the biggest one you can and put it on somebody's back and have them like slowly turn around, and you're going to get a jump scare at least out of some segment of the audience that's arachnophobic. But it is interesting to think about when do you see sort of insects painted in a positive light within film? And I can't really think of too many other than maybe within the world of Pokemon. There's plenty of insect-related characters that are sweet. Flutterby, but yeah, generally the reaction is either that they're associated with disease and vermin in some sort of way, or they're venomous and they're going to kill you, so giant wasps or Attack of the Killer Bees type stuff, or this idea of this sort of mindless horde.
Well, I guess you can go to Japan for Mothra.
Yeah, totally. Mothra saves the day.
And it seems like you mentioned wasps and bees, but it seems like the ability of these tiny, tiny things to hold venom that could potentially kill you is something that ignites imagination.
Sure, yeah. And, that again, it goes to the strength in numbers kind of thing, because the sting of one individual normal-sized ant is certainly not dangerous to most people unless they're allergic to them. But if you get mobbed by honeybees or, in some, I'm not sure that I've ever heard of death by mass ant envenomation, but it's probably possible, then, it becomes an issue. So this, again, I think this idea of the mindless horde, not just mindless, but it's got weapons, is pretty frightening.
I have to confess that at one point in my life, I was interested in going into zoology and my grandfather had worked in Africa, and I thought, it'd be great to work with wildlife preserves. And then someone pointed out there were these 6-inch Goliath beetles in Africa. And for some reason, insects have that power to kind of make you go like, ew.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting because there's where my hardwiring is wrong. Because there are very few insects, and in fact, I can't think of insects that make me go ooh. Like the one sort of arthropod that creeps me out are centipedes. Like giant centipedes creep me out because they're really dang fast and they are venomous, and there's something about them that's creepy to me. But yeah, it's without a doubt, and the bigger they are, the more ooey they are. But, also the more fascinating they are, because in our collection here at the museum, we've got a few education drawers that we pull out when we're giving people behind the scenes tours and stuff like that. And we've got one drawer that I call the wow drawer. And that's because that's the reaction I get when I pull it out of the cabinet. And what's it filled with? It's filled with a lot of big beetles and big, it's the biggest and the best kind of thing. If somebody saw that on their shoulder when they were walking through the rainforest, then yeah, their reaction would probably be ooh, gross. But when you get a chance to sort of reflect on them when they're safely dead and pinned behind glass, then it's wow, awesome, I just feel like that all the time, every time I see them.
Well, I have to say, one of the first times I had met you, I was here with a camera person, and a scorpion fell on the ground, and we're kind of going like, well, it's not dangerous, right? And you're going like, oh, don't worry about it, and my camera person was like, it can't kill you or anything, and you're like, oh no, don't worry, it's not lethal or anything. Right. It would hurt.
Yeah, I remember that. I think I remember right because I had it in a container and I had some long forceps and I was pulling it out with, and as I was pulling it out, she was freaking out, and I said, oh, don't worry, I won't drop it, and then of course I dropped it, so it was pretty bad.
And you were completely unperturbed by that. I'll catch him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what led you into entomology. What was it about bugs in particular that fascinated you?
I'm interested in this actually goes back to something I said earlier about nature being a play in which we've got all these cast of characters, and I don't know why this interests me. It just inherently interests me, but I'm interested in the way organisms interact with one another. So I started off in botany, actually, when I was an undergraduate, and I started getting interested in the way other things interact with plants. So how the things that eat plants, the things that pollinate plants, and the things that disperse the seeds of plants. And that just automatically leads you down the road to getting more interested in insects. And about that same time, my wife was an undergraduate in entomology, and she was taking a general entomology class, and she was going up to study one night, and I, like a puppy dog, followed her up there to study with her. And there were these samples that they had been extracting all the little tiny invertebrates out of leaf litter from a forest. And while she was studying, I was just getting these samples and putting them underneath the microscope and looking at this sort of soup of insects in a petri dish and ethanol. And that was totally what that night. It was just so fascinating to see these things that looked like little grits of dirt, and then to realize, oh wow, those have legs, and the morphological diversity in something that is so small you wouldn't even recognize it to be living is amazing when you get it underneath the microscope. And that's what I'd love to do. If I could, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would still continue to do entomology, but I would just sit in front of a microscope and look at little tiny things.
So have we discovered all the insects that exist?
we have not by a long shot discovered all of the insects that exist. So right now there's about 1.1 million described species of insects. And the most conservative estimate is that there's at least 4 million. And so that means there's 3 times as many left to discover than what's already been discovered. And there's some estimates that are even higher than that. And really where a lot of the diversity lies that we haven't discovered turns back around into sci-fi again, is that there are a lot of parasitic wasps. And we know there are already a lot of parasitic wasps. But what's acknowledged to be sort of the biggest group of insects is beetles. So like one out of every 5 animals of described species of animals is a beetle. And I can't remember what the total number of them is. It's somewhere around, let's say it's 350,000. Well, these parasitic wasps can be highly specialized so that they only parasitize, say, one species of beetle. And then within that, they can be even more specialized, where there might be one parasitic wasp that only parasitizes the eggs of the beetle, and another one that parasitizes the larvae of the beetle, and another that parasitizes the adult of the beetle. And then there's parasitic wasps that parasitize the parasitic wasps, And so you can see how the numbers just like explode exponentially. And that's where a lot of folks think that there's just a huge chunk of undiscovered diversity is in these parasitic wasps.
People are readily aware of the fact that we may not know everything about space, that there's all this stuff out there that we haven't seen and can't discover. And then to think that, like, in a cup full of dirt, there might still be things that we don't know about.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing that I always say I've got good job security. Like, there's plenty to keep us busy. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of corporations hiring. There's a lot of work to do, but nobody hiring. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's often a rant that you hear amongst biodiversity scientists, people who study the living world, that like, oh, we don't get as much money as NASA, kind of thing. And it's true. There's a lot that remains to be discovered here, and we don't know a large percentage of what's going on our own planet.
Well, what you need to do is you need to make a science fiction film about how a cup of dirt with a few undiscovered creatures in it ends up like taking over the planet.
Right, yeah. Make big dollars on box office and then channel it into science.
Or just terrify people to the point that they start demanding, we need more science on those things that we don't know about.
Totally, yeah. Scare tactics. Yeah.
But why, for people who may not be aware of all this, why is it important for us to kind of go through and catalog all these possible creatures that are out there?
Going back into childhood, though this wasn't childhood. I think I was in college when when I was watching Bill Nye the Science Guy on afternoons. But he had this one demonstration that has stuck in my mind for a long time of a Jenga tower. Most people are familiar with the game Jenga, right? And if you picture the world or an ecosystem like a Jenga tower, and species go extinct, we know that we are driving species to extinction. We're in the middle of what they're calling the sixth extinction. It's one of the largest extinction events in geological history. So we know species are going extinct. So you've got your Jenga tower, you've got your ecosystem composed of all these wooden blocks that are species, and you start pulling out Jenga pieces. And there's typically, in most ecosystems and within the earth, enough redundancy built in that you can pull out some animals can go extinct and the Jenga tower will stay upright, kind of thing. But eventually you pull out enough pieces and the tower crumbles and the ecosystems start to fail. And we as humans are very dependent upon ecosystems. We're dependent upon, obviously plants to generate the oxygen for us, the bees to pollinate our plants that we eat, the bacteria and all the things that are in the soil to filter our water to go back down into the aquifers and be clean. And so, we should be very invested in understanding our world better so that we don't pull out too many Jenga pieces.
And is it hard to get people kind of on the side of insects in the sense of, I think people completely side with the idea of like, we got to make sure that pandas stay here because they're cute and cuddly looking, or a jaguar or something like that. But to defend, we need to have roaches.
Yeah.
Is it a tough battle?
Yeah, it is definitively difficult to defend insects in that context. So we call your jaguars and your pandas charismatic megafauna. But I think of the entomological world as the charismatic microfauna. There's a lot of charisma there. And again, this sort of goes back to the movie on why I really appreciate this movie is the cinematography, of painting a character of what it's like to be an ant. But at the same time, I've never met a 3 or 4 year old who isn't fascinated by insects. I mean, if they're not, then it's very clearly then they've been taught, from an early age to ooh, spiders, kind of thing. And so I think, hopefully we don't beat it out of children, but we certainly drive it out of children at some age. This where they become gross, and maybe it's just the experience of actually seeing maggots in the trash can for the first time, or roaches and stuff like that teaches us. But at the same time, going back to our Jenga pieces, some of that charismatic megafauna is one species, and we can pull that Jenga piece out, and the tower may or may not fall, but it's definitive that plants are what keep us alive. They produce oxygen. And then once you get past plants, sort of the next line of defense that we have is insects, because the insects are doing all sorts of what we call ecosystem services. They're pollinating, they're degrading, they're eating, they're breaking down poop. If it weren't for insects, we'd be up to our eyeballs in poop, because there's no other things that break down poop, Even though it's a tough row to hoe, I think there's a lot of compelling arguments to be made for why we should be much more invested in entomology, and it's just a matter of getting the word out, and that's what we're trying to do.
I guess it's also harder to kind of give human traits to insects as opposed to, panda bear kind of sits up like a human, or a gorilla looks very much like us, but it's hard to get that cockroach or that centipede to have that human.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, vertebrates, I think one of the main things vertebrates have going for them, most vertebrates, is that they have eyeballs. And that you can look into the eyes of particularly babies, they got such big eyes relative to their skull size and stuff like that. So baby panda, baby whatever, even vertebrates that people might find gross, when they see them in baby form, they're typically oh, so cute. And invertebrates, they've got eyes, but they're compound eyes. I mean, it's so foreign to us. Everything about invertebrates and arthropods in particular is just so foreign to us. It's really hard to identify with them.
So do you have any plans for a future series in terms of doing anything different, or are you going to keep with this approach?
We'd like to continue to do real science at least on an annual basis, where it's a month of programming, but we are definitely always trying to figure out new approaches to engage with different audiences. My main goal as a museum entomologist is to make people who might not normally think of themselves as being interested in a natural history museum, interested in a natural history museum. And so if they already sort of self-identify as, well, I'm not interested in a natural history museum, then that's a tough fight. That's a tough, person to turn. And the best way that we can make them turn, again, is by finding things that are more relevant to their interests. And so pop culture is, by its very name, being popular, is a really good gateway or entry point for trying to educate people about the natural world.
Well, I have to confess also that after meeting you, I looked at museums differently, because as someone who was a parent and as a child whose parents took me to museums, I always thought of it as a place where you go and you look at exhibits. Yeah. And I never realized fully that you guys are a research place as well.
Right. Yeah, definitely. We've got, I think our research staff we've got about 30 plus different research staff, technicians and all, 8 million specimens in our collections. And we're constantly publishing research and also sort of working with other agencies within Southern California and Baja California to provide the best because we have all these specimens from all throughout history, try to provide the best sort of historical data we can in order to inform like species management and monitoring conservation. So behind the scenes, there's a lot going on.
And currently, you have an exhibit, which I believe the tagline for it is "Come look in our drawers," which is you're bringing some stuff out from these kind of collections.
Yeah, it's an exhibit called Unshelved, and we have been using our advertisements say, "Look what's in our drawers," which is quasi-sexual harassment, possibly. But yeah, it's stuff that has been behind the scenes for an extended period of time or has never seen the light of day. It's a combination of research specimens and stuff that was used in exhibits a long time ago and people haven't seen. So for people who've been around San Diego for a long time, they'll see like kind of old friends that they remember from previous days at the Natural History Museum. But then they're also going to see a bunch of stuff they've never seen before. And what I really like about it is that the interpretation in it is actually very minimal. It's not like there's not a huge story we're telling you other than, wow, this is amazing. And we want you to understand that we have collections. That's about the main message of it. And so because of that, just wanting to inspire people to think like, wow, this is amazing. It really is sort of the best of the best. It's like it's colorful, beautiful, weird, wild, big, small, all the extremes are represented,
Well, I believe I interviewed one of your colleagues, Phil Unit, and I was talking to him about the specimens they have. He does small mammals and birds. And like I had no real sense of how you can use these specimens for something, and he pointed out that through the measurement of the eggshells of pelicans, I think, they were able to determine how DDT was making those eggs thinner. And if they hadn't had that collection, there would be no reference point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the strength of having what we call them vouchers, because they vouch for the existence of something in the past. So having these historical vouchers as opposed to like maybe somebody's field notes or somebody's photographs, right? We actually have the real deal. And because of that, we can look back into the past and we can reinterpret what other people have, seen. But we can also do things like, I know I saw an article recently on some publication where they went and actually they sort of swabbed the feathers of birds to get an understanding of historical pollution levels over time, because the pollution gathers on the feathers of these birds. So there's all sorts of ways in which you might not normally think of collections being used, that they're being used to help us understand the past and sort of prognosticate about the future at some level.
So if you could pick one bug to be the next star of a science fiction film, do you have a favorite that you would put out there?
So Jerusalem crickets are these really weird crickets that we have in Southern California and northwestern Mexico, and they're big. They can be about the size of a man's thumb. They don't have any wings. They look like giant termites, and it's definitely one of the things that I get the most phone calls about at the Natural History Museum, and I can generally sort of play this game of name that tune when people call, and I can name it pretty quick because people will say like, well, one, they'll either say giant termite or this weird alien. I'm like, oh, yeah, you've got a Jerusalem cricket. And so not only do they look weird, but they've got this really horrific story of parasitism associated with them, where these horsehair worms get inside of them and parasitize them, and it's this really insane story. But then on top of that, they communicate with one another through ultrasonic drumming. So they unlike a lot of like crickets and grasshoppers, they don't make a sound that we can hear. Instead, they drum their abdomen against the ground and they send it like, as a sound waves through the earth, like tremors through the earth kind of thing. And so I think a giant Jerusalem cricket story would be pretty awesome.
What always comes to mind when I see them is they look naked. I mean, for an insect, that's an odd description, but they're kind of flesh toned and they look like they are missing some layer.
Yeah, and in Mexico, at least in Baja California, they call them niños de la tierra, so the children of the earth, because at some level, when you do look at them head on, they kind of have this, it feels like a humanoid alien, right? So it doesn't look like a it doesn't look like a human skull so much, but it sort of looks like that stereotypical big four-headed, alien skull. And they do totally look naked. That's a very good description.
All right, when you mentioned that they communicate through rubbing their abdomens on the ground, part of me is thinking, like, how do you find these things out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, probably somebody, observed them doing, like, why is it shaking its abdomen up and down, and then, okay, well, let's start taking a look at that. I did, when I was working on my PhD, one of the professors was working with a different group of insects that is on plants that does the same thing where it will shake its abdomen against a branch and communicate ultrasonically through the branches. And they are species-specific calls. So, like, the male will drum his way in a way that only the female of his species will react to, kind of thing. And I remember going into his lab, and he had a whole bunch of, like, little transparent party cups that he had a very thin film, like, stretched over the bottom of it, and the insect would be in the cup, and he'd have a little tiny wire sensor on the bottom of the film, so that when the insect drummed onto this thin film, he could record the song, the ultrasonic song of this insect. It was pretty wild.
All right, it is always fun talking to you about the films and about entomology, so thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for stopping by.
That was Michael Wall, curator of entomology and vice president of science and conservation at the San Diego Natural History Museum. Next up is Bradley Wojtek, assistant professor of computational cognitive science and neuroscience at UC San Diego. He's also author of the book Do Zombies Dream of Undead Sheep, which I highly recommend. Wojtek will be presenting Christopher Nolan's Memento. Here's the trailer for the film.
I guess I've already told you about my condition.
Only every time I see you.
You don't remember where you've been or what you've just done.
I can't make new memories. Everything just fades.
What's the last thing you do remember?
My wife.
That's sweet.
Dying.
You really want to get this guy, don't you?
My wife deserves vengeance.
When you find this guy, what are you gonna do?
I'm gonna kill him.
Somebody's got to pay, Lenny. Somebody always pays. You have to be very careful. You wander around playing detective. Maybe you should start investigating yourself.
This guy is so dangerous. He's gonna kill me.
Who is he?
What do you want from me?
I want my life back! I think someone's trying to get me to kill the wrong guy.
You can question everything. You can never know anything for sure.
There are things you know for sure.
You can't trust her.
Even if you get revenge, you're not gonna remember it. You're not even gonna know that it happened.
Who did this to you?
You did. You don't know who you are.
Bradley, this is going to be your second time doing a real science talk. Last time you chose Altered States, and now you're doing Memento. What led you to choose Memento?
It's funny. Memento is one of those movies that I have actually used in talks a number of times because the main character, I don't have to do like a spoiler alert, the main character will just has memory problems. His memory span is, I think, only a couple of seconds long. And that's a real thing that has happened in the history of neuroscience. There's a very famous case. Somebody had a brain surgery that removed both parts, left and right, and both sides of the brain of his hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that allows us to form new memories. And both of those had to be removed. And this is many decades ago that this happened. The man has since passed away, but he lived for decades without this. And he had a memory span of only 30 seconds to a minute. And then it was like a reset happened. And he would forget everything up until that reset. He could remember everything in his life from before that brain surgery, but after that, he only had a memory span of maybe a couple of minutes for the rest of his life. So it's a real, actual neurological condition that has occurred in a real person. Henry Malazan, we now know his name. He just went by HM for decades in the neuroscience literature. And so it's a very good way of teaching people about a very real neuroscientific topic, but using something that's kind of, Memento, I'm not going to say is a fun movie. It's a very good movie, and it's got its moments, of course, but it's pretty dramatic and intense. But it's an enjoyable movie that people can relate to.
And what do you think of it in terms of how it used that in the narrative? Is it fairly accurate in kind of the way it depicts it, or does it use it just as kind of a jumping off point for its narrative?
It's absolutely a jumping off point, but it's hard to know if it's accurate. It's hard to even imagine what that would be like to only have a memory span of a couple of minutes, right? So I can't tell if it's accurate or not. But from everything I have read and heard about the researchers who worked with Henry Molaison, HM, and then seeing Memento, it seems like it gives a pretty accurate depiction of what that might be like. Brenda Milner is the scientist that worked with patient HM for so many years, and she saw him for decades, multiple times a week, and she worked with this guy. And every time she came into the room, he would forget who she was, and she had to reintroduce herself for decades. It's hard to imagine what that would be like. And so I think Memento uses that as the fundamental conceit of the film to very good effect.
You think I don't know my own wife? What the fuck is wrong with you?
Well, I guess I can only make you remember the things you want to be true. Like old Jimmy down there.
He's not the right guy.
He was to you. Come on, you got your revenge. Enjoy it while you still remember. What difference does it make whether he was your guy or not?
It makes all the difference.
Why? You're never gonna know.
Yes, I will.
No, you won't.
I will. Somehow.
You won't remember.
When it's done, I will know. It'll be different.
Well, I thought so too. In fact, I was sure of it, but you didn't. That's right. The real John G. I helped you find him over a year ago. He's already dead.
Don't lie to me anymore.
Look, Lenny, I was the cop assigned to your wife's case. I believed you. I thought you deserved a chance for revenge. I'm the one that helped you find the other guy in your bathroom that night. The guy that cracked your skull and fucked your wife. We found him, you killed him. But you didn't remember. So I helped you. Start looking again. Looking for the guy you already killed.
Oh, yeah? So who was he?
Just some guy. I mean, does it even matter who? No reason, Lenny. No conspiracy, just bad fucking luck. A couple of junkies too strung out to realize your wife didn't live alone. But when you killed him, I was so convinced that you'd remember. But it didn't stick. Like nothing ever sticks, like this won't stick. I took that picture. Just when you did it. Look how happy you are. I wanted to see that face again.
Oh, gee, thanks.
Fuck you. I gave you a reason to live, and you were more than happy to help. You don't want the truth. You make up your own truth, like your police file. It was complete when I gave it to you. Who took out the 12 pages?
You, probably.
No, it wasn't me. See, it was you.
Why would I do that?
To create a puzzle you could never solve? You know how many towns, how many John G's or James G's? I mean, shit, Lenny, I'm a fucking John G.
Your name's Teddy.
My mother calls me Teddy. My name's John Edward Gamble. Cheer up. There's plenty of John G's for us to find.
It also, in addition to having a character who can't remember, the filmmaker chooses to break up his narrative structure in such a way that it's also being told in reverse order. So for the viewer, how is that kind of taxing their brain in a different way?
That's what's great about movies like this, right? When a movie is well constructed like this, it not only forces you to try and take on the perspective of what must that be like for the character, but the structure of the movie being in reverse order, which isn't immediately apparent. Actually, you don't realize that for quite a long time, that is what's happening. That then sort of puts you in a weird headspace, right? It like forces you to take on the perspective, not just because you're trying to understand empathically an interesting character, but the very structure of the movie forces you into their perspective a little bit. That's kind of confusing and is off-putting and you don't know what's happening. And so I think good filmmaking doesn't just tell you, it also makes you experience it too. And that's one of the things I love about this movie.
The character, because he's cognizant of the fact that he is not able to remember things for long periods of time, tries multiple things to help him. So he tattoos himself with a lot of information, and he's also written himself notes. So is that something that a person who suffers some sort of memory issue, maybe it's Alzheimer's, maybe it's something like this, is there a sense that people like try to recognize that and help their own brains to kind of make up for those deficits?
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be even somebody that has some kind of like overt neurological condition, right? I think we all do that. So what's kind of funny is this movie takes place, it was filmed and made before the smartphone era, right? Think about your smartphone now. I don't remember what I'm doing. Like, later today, I don't remember what meetings I have. So I know that I'm not going to remember these kinds of things. And I'm not very good necessarily even at keeping like an appointment book because I forget to check the appointment book. So if I put all of my appointments in my phone as reminders, my phone will buzz and I'll look at my phone and be like, oh, that's right, I have a meeting. So even somebody who, maybe it's a little bit presumptuous of me to say that I'm neurologically intact, but let's pretend that I am actually neurologically intact. Even somebody who will still offload some of their day-to-day, memories and chores to other devices in order to compensate, right? So, there are certain people that I know who are really bad at remembering people's names. Or they have a hard time recognizing faces. And so everybody will use certain tricks, like, maybe they have a hard time recognizing somebody's name, so they have like a little song that they associate with the person. Or, we all do these kinds of tricks almost, right? So it's not just a neurological thing. But yes, in this movie, he absolutely does. He tries to compensate, right? He tattoos himself with notes so that when he sort of blinks and comes back into awareness after his memory restarts, he looks down and he sees, what does that tattoo mean on my arm? And he reads it and he tries to reacquaint himself. You can imagine that, in a smartphone era, maybe he'd just have like, a little video that he filmed for himself to remind himself of what his situation is that he watches every time his memory comes back or something.
So tell people what kind of area of neuroscience is your specialty and what got you into that?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so our brains have 86 billion with a B neurons, brain cells, and these are little tiny cells that are interconnected through these wires that we call axons that aren't quite touching each other, and they send little chemicals that cause little sparks of activity in between them. Somehow in our brains, these 86 billion neurons are communicating with each other in this ridiculously noisy, biological, messy, electrochemical environment, and it works. It works enough that I can be having a conversation with you, right? Like that's mind-boggling to me. So my lab studies, how do these 86 billion neurons manage to actually talk to each other? Like, what is the signals? What are the codes that they're using to communicate, right? And why do I study it? It's fundamentally, in my opinion, just a difficult, fascinating problem. It's like a caveman being given a computer and saying, how does it work? And, maybe after a couple of 100 years of poking at this one computer, they say, well, there's little sparks that go off, but we don't know what programming languages are. We don't know anything about coding. We have to try and reverse engineer all of that. And that's what it feels like working with the brain. So if nothing else, I feel like I have job security because we're not going to figure it out in my lifetime.
Now, for this Real Science series, you are using a film, all the scientists in this are using films that are pop entertainment, films that are easily accessible, not necessarily scientific films. How did kind of science fiction or pop entertainment play a role in you going into neuroscience? Were there films that kind of sparked your interest and said, like, that's an area that kind of I'm interested in exploring?
Yeah, absolutely. Science fiction comic books have played a huge part in my early scientific growth, I should say, like as a teenager, right? I read, just growing up as a kid, a bunch of science fiction books and comic books. And I think back to Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. And this whole idea that there is this group of, he called them psychohistorians, that could quantify the trillions of people living in a galactic empire and predict the empire's decline. And then they know that's coming, and then they try and figure out what they can do in order to shorten the duration that the galaxy is in its upcoming dark ages through anticipating that it's going to happen and then planting seeds to make it shorten, right? Now we would call that data science, I guess, right? But it's like the idea that that's even a thing, right? Like some science fiction author, brilliant, not just some, it's Asimov, right? But this brilliant science fiction author came up with this entire idea and anticipated this idea of like large-scale analysis of human interaction and behavior well before there was anything like a Facebook. Science fiction is great at that, right? It's pushing the boundaries of what could be possible. You look at the original Iron Man comics from the 1960s, and the Iron Man suit was literally an iron suit that had an air conditioning and a microphone in it, right? Now Iron Man suits this like nanotechnology, little nanites that live in his bloodstream that he thinks about it and they form a suit around him. 50 years from now, are we going to think that sounds really trivial and trite? Just like the air-conditioned suit with a speaker sounds to us right now. Who knows? But it's the people that are not limited by science reality, that are given the freedom to think about what could be possible. That's inspiring. And then the day-to-day drudgery of science, the actual research aspect of being a scientist, is slowly trying to push things forward to see if we can get to technologies that would make life a little bit easier and the quality of life better and, people happier, right? But you need that inspiration, you need that big picture, and I feel like science fiction and film and comics are fantastic for providing that little spark of inspiration and hope.
Now, I've spoken to you before because we have a common love for zombies. And you've spoken about some of your research and talk about science fiction. One of the things that you talked about, which I find fascinating and amazed that it can be done, is you work with some people who, for whatever reasons, have their brain exposed due to surgery or operation. And you get permission from them to do tests and research. So talk a little bit about that, because that feels like science fiction to me, but it's something that's readily done.
Yeah, to be clear, that is totally unrelated to zombies.
Yes. Yes, sorry. No, that was just the starting point of our friendship was zombies.
No. So a couple of percent of the world's population has epilepsy, which is the disease, a disease that causes seizures. And it's only like 1 to 3% of people have it. And for the vast majority of those people, those seizures are relatively well controlled by anti-epileptic drugs. So they take, some medication every day. But for whatever reason, in some fraction of people, those anti-epileptic drugs just aren't doing it. And so in a fraction of those, the seizures are so severe that they might lose consciousness multiple times a day. Obviously, that's pretty debilitating for day-to-day living. And so for that fraction of people, they will often choose to undergo a brain surgery to remove the part of the brain that is causing the seizures. And that's actually the UCSD over at Thornton Hospital. This is done. Professor and neurosurgeon Sharona Ben-Haim is my colleague who actually does the surgeries. In order to do that, none of the brain imaging methods we have are sufficient to identify where the seizures are coming from. That means that, unfortunately, the only way to figure out for sure where those seizures are coming from is to have a person undergo an operation where electrodes, these recording devices, are implanted directly into the parts of the brain the surgical team thinks the seizures are coming from. And then they wait for a couple of days, a week, for the person to have enough seizures that they're confident they know where it's coming from. And then they remove all of the electrodes and remove the part of the brain. And the vast majority of those people are seizure-free or at least significantly seizure-reduced, so they can get on to having a more normal life. During that week or two while they're recording, we go in and ask them if they'd be willing to do our memory tests or something like that. Because otherwise they're just hanging out in the epilepsy monitoring unit waiting to have seizures. So they're like reading books, watching TV, playing games, talking with their friends and family, just waiting. And so we bug them for half an hour because their unfortunate situation provides an incredibly rare opportunity to study the human brain directly that we can't do. And what's amazing, the connection actually back to Memento, is that person who I mentioned, HM, the person who in the 1960s had that surgery where they removed his left and right hippocampus, the memory part of the brain that caused him to wake up no longer able to form new memories. This is precisely the reason he was undergoing that surgery, is the surgical team in the 60s identified both his left and right hippocampus as causing his seizures. And so they removed both of those parts of the brain, and also probably other parts just in front of that called the amygdala. And he woke up unable to form new memories, and they don't do that kind of surgery anymore. They don't remove both sides anymore. They try and be more precise, but that was why. And so it's actually, for me personally, this movie, this idea of not forming new memories, I study memory. That's one of the systems that we study. And how does the brain talk to itself? How do we form memories? Because our memories influence our perception in real time on a day-to-day basis, right? We perceive what we expect to perceive is one way that we can sort of talk about it. And to me, that's fascinating. And so it's a wonderful tie-in not only to my own research, but to the fundamentally strange history of neuroscience. A large part about what we know about how the brain works is by these unfortunate cases like patient HM, who had a surgery that hasn't really ever been done since. But from his unfortunate experience, the field has learned a tremendous amount about how the brain works.
Well, in your book, Do Zombies Dream of Undead Sheep, where you use zombies to help enlighten on neuroscience, you pointed out one thing that I thought was fascinating, which is that it was a doctor working with gladiator injuries that provided a foundation for some of neuroscience.
Yeah, I mean, this is 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago in ancient Rome. There was a physician named Galen, Galen. Several parts of the brain are named after him, or I should say like the brain circulatory system. He discovered, he was a physician to gladiators. And gladiators are a group of people who had a lot of blunt force trauma to the head and also penetrating head wounds and stuff like that. And he was trying to keep them alive. And he began to notice that certain kinds of brain injury to certain parts of the brain would cause specific problems that were like reproducible. So like damage to, the back of the brain might cause visual impairments, for example. That's not exactly what he studied, but you get the idea. And so the foundational history of neuroscience is paved with all of these interesting cases. One of the reasons that we know about how the spinal cord carries sensory information into the body and commands from the brain to move our muscles is by examining people from the 17 and 1800s who were injured in duels. So either like a tiny little rapier, like a little sharp pointy sword, cut one part of their spinal cord, or like a bullet incompletely penetrated part of their spinal cord. Physician noticed that there were systematic differences or impairments, I should say, from those kinds of spinal cord injuries. And so yeah, it's morbid, but there's something, I don't know, something nice to know that should I ever have some kind of like, traumatic brain injury or physical trauma, that at least something maybe useful could come out of it, right? Wow, this took a dark turn. But I mean, it's I don't want to emphasize that part, right? Like there is something really, really amazing out of that, right? It's like, the world is messy and there are unfortunate things, but it's nice to know that even out of unfortunate circumstances, something amazing can happen. I guess that's my attempt at turning that dark message into something more inspiring.
I mean, I think it's amazing because, you don't necessarily think from something like that, like from gladiators, we might actually have a foundation of something really amazing for neuroscience.
Yeah, the whole history of science, not just neuroscience, is filled with these little random accidents or events that, lead to amazing discoveries, right? Yeah, I mean, that's what makes science fun. The fact that these random accidents can lead to something amazing is one of the beauties of it, right? I think, what is a quote? It's not, the best parts of science aren't the eureka I found it moments. It's the looking at something and going, that's funny. Right? Like those really are the amazing things. It's like when you run an experiment and something defies your expectations and you go, why is that? And like those are the beautiful moments of science when discovery can happen.
The idea of the brain not functioning properly is probably one of the most horrific things you can imagine happening to you. So that seems to be one of the attractions for science fiction or horror. And for me personally, like the thing I find most terrifying of all would be the idea of Alzheimer's. And that, to me, kind of pops up in zombies for me. It's this notion of like you no longer are yourself and you no longer kind of have control over what you're doing. But you study memory and stuff. So how do you see like some of those real fears translated into kind of pop fiction or into science fiction?
I mean, that's kind of like what is the heart of fiction and storytelling, right? Like what is it? It's like human beings trying to grasp the idea of love and mortality, right? Like that's like the foundation for every tragedy and comedy and science fiction and horror piece, just about, right? These certain kinds of like diseases are one of those that many people, we just try not to think about, right? It's like too scary for us to try and tackle on a day-to-day basis. You're really like, I've got to like take my kids to, baseball game and swimming classes, and I have to go shopping. I don't need to be like contemplating, existential issues right now. But storytelling provides us with an outlet where it's more approachable. And I think, you can take many different tactics to it. Horror is one, right? Because it can be horrifying to think about it. But, there like even comedy, right, is another perspective. You look at certain, I'm trying to think of like medical comedies, right, where like you do have this kind of perspective. Like was the Robin Williams, the Patch Adams movie, right? Or Scrubs even, right? It's like you have this like existential issues that you're trying to deal with, life and death, and some of it might be like memory loss and things like that. But you can, instead of treating it as a horror perspective, you can also take the comedy perspective or the love perspective, the romance perspective, right? 50 First Dates. One of the characters, the romantic interest, doesn't have a memory, just like in Memento, right? They don't have a memory span anymore. But that's a romantic comedy movie of that topic, right? So you can take the same ideas and look at them from different perspectives. I think it's just everybody trying to deal with issues that are too complicated, and storytelling and putting in a narrative around it is one of the ways that we deal with that.
And in choosing Memento, what are you hoping that after people see the film and hear you talk about it, what are you hoping they might take away from this?
When I chose the movie, one of the reasons I picked it was to try and get people to engage with the idea of just memory. Like, what role does memory and past experience play in who we are, right? You think about a movie like this where the Guy Pearce is constantly like reinventing himself by necessity every time he snaps back into reality. I don't know how to put it, right? Like his memory comes back.
Do I lie to myself to be happy? In your case, Teddy, yes, I will.
What's constant there and what's malleable, right? And I think, to me, that's just an interesting question about like who we are. Like we put so much weight on what we have done as shaping who we are. And so inherently what that means is like our memories, in some ways I think a lot of people think like our memories of our past are who we are, right? Without really considering that like at any given moment you can change some of that, right? It's like every moment is anew and afresh. And in this movie, that's taken to the extreme. Like every moment he is like reborn every couple of minutes in that sense. And to me, that's just a fascinating idea.
Well, and to me, like one of the things that always scares me the most is the sense of loss of identity. And even in a comic form, it's always bothered me. There's a Heaven Can Wait, where Warren Beatty is this football star who dies, and they take his body away too quickly, and they put him in another body, which is fine. Like, I don't mind he's in a different body, but he's himself inside. But then at the end, they go like, oh, okay, we got this great new body for you. We're putting you into it. And now you no longer have the memory of anything of who you were. And like to me, even though it was this light comedy, this notion of like, now you don't have that set of memories anymore.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's just like, that's our struggle, right? Like, and thankfully, most of us don't have to think about that on a day-to-day basis, right? But it's nice to engage that aspect of who we are sometimes. I mean, Altered Carbon, which is one of Netflix's new hit shows, right? I mean, it's a great science fiction series, actually. I mean, I think there's a reason also that certain things like that, where for people who aren't familiar, Altered Carbon is this idea that our consciousnesses can be transferred between bodies, and that allows some people to just live forever because they can constantly move their consciousness from one body to a younger clone of their own body. Like these are intriguing and amazing and scary and all of those things that make us who we are, right? And I think that's why they're so popular, is for this reason. It like engages that part of our humanity that it's fundamental. We all have to deal with it at some point. Maybe like science fiction is practice in that sense of like getting comfortable with these like really heady ideas.
Well, and it seems like the idea of memory is something that would be hard to research. Is that the case?
Yeah, memory is really hard to research. So what we scientists will do is we try and like strip everything down to just like the barest core. So like if I'm studying memory, I'm not asking you about your childhood experiences or anything. I might have you sitting in a room and I'll flash a couple of images at you, just like squares of different colors, for example, is one of the tests that we use. And you might see like a flash of 6 different colored squares on the screen for 1/10 of a second. And then we make you wait a second or 2 seconds. And then we show the same number of squares that we just showed you before. And you have to tell me, did one of the squares change color? Yes or no? Right? That would be a way that we study memory, is over that couple of seconds, what is happening in your brain that allows you to compare that first set of squares that you remember seeing to the next set of squares, right? So we take something really complicated like memory and we try and just like the very basic core of what might memory be. And is that really memory? it's a kind of memory. Is that really what we're getting at when we talk about like our sense of, constructed idea of who we are over several decades of life? Probably not, but it is a type of memory that we can study more cleanly and we have experimental control over. So, baby steps, we'll get there.
And if you had any other films to recommend regarding memory or the area of neuroscience that you specialize in, are there any other films you would recommend to people to watch?
Wow, that's a really good question. I haven't actually considered that one. Coming up in conversation just now, we talked about 50 First Dates was another one of those like memory loss sort of things. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, about like selectively removing memories that we don't want anymore, is another very interesting one. Yeah, I mean, even more broadly, like Altered Carbon, right? Which is this idea of like transferring consciousness or memory from one body to the other. They treat that, well, in the book fantastically, and I think the show did a very good job, taking liberties with certain ideas also. That was another very good one. You should give me homework. I would have been able to study ahead of time. No, but I would recommend those movies. I think those are all pretty good. In that sense of understanding or engaging with the idea of memory as being part of who we are.
Although zombies don't come up in the film that you're doing, I feel like it's not fair to talk to you and not at least bring up zombies once. But I've noticed recently that a slight change in the zombie film is that we get more of these self-aware zombies with this sense of they're dead and they know it, and it's a slightly different take because we're now getting the perspective of inside the zombie head instead of the people terrified outside dealing with them. And I'm just wondering if you feel that reflects anything that may be changing in neuroscience or just maybe the way that we're perceiving the world.
I think it's maybe just art pushing, right? Zombies are a pop culture thing that aren't going to go away, apparently. There's only so much that can be done with them, right? And traditionally, the zombie stories that have been all told from the perspective of the survivors, right? And so the idea that maybe there's an interesting story to be told about zombies from the zombies' perspective, I think that's just like changing the art a little bit, right? It's trying to do something new with a genre that can maybe get kind of stale. What was the one about the... what was the one that came out a couple of years ago now? It was the romantic rom-com, right? The guy.
Oh yeah, Warm Bodies.
Warm Bodies, right? That was it. That was the one that like really started that new perspective, I think. There weren't very many that took that perspective, I think, before the Warm Bodies one, where the main character, one of the protagonists, was a zombie, right? Who started to fall in love. Yeah, I think I don't know if it's reflecting anything like more broadly, culture at large, but I definitely think it's artists trying to do something novel and interesting with a existing medium that's getting maybe a little bit stale.
All right, so I expect some more perspective from the zombie brain from you, and you can do another book.
Yeah, we should probably update that, right? They're like, what would that mean? Anyway, yeah. Thanks.
All right, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to you introducing Memento.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I always enjoy this kind of thing. So, yeah, look forward to it.
That was Bradley Wojtek, Assistant Professor of Computational Cognitive Science and Neuroscience at UC San Diego. Next up is Daniel Sheehan, Physics Professor at University of San Diego. As with Wall and Wojtek, he's returning for a second year at Real Science. His film of choice is The Matrix. Here's the original trailer for the film.
Whoa. Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world?
What is happening to me?
The answer is out there, Neo. It's the question that drives us.
What is the Matrix?
The Matrix is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
They're watching you, Neo.
Human beings are a disease. You are a cancer of this planet. And we are the cure.
Get me the hell out of here!
Daniel, this is going to be the second time you partake in the Real Science film program. And to start with, I just wanted to ask you, what was it about science that initially sparked your interest and got you wanting to be a scientist?
Well, I started thinking about it. Actually, I thought about it, and it kind of happened in a flash in third grade. I had a teacher named Mrs. Kenzie, and we were talking about the planets at the time. And we got to Pluto, and Mrs. Kinsey just said rather matter-of-factly, scientists know there's no life on Pluto. And I was sitting there quietly. I'd been quiet up to that point in my whole student career. And suddenly it just kind of struck me as odd that she'd say that. And I raised my hand and said, how do they know? They haven't been there. And she said, well, scientists know. And then just something snapped in me, and I realized, no, they don't know. They haven't been there. And so I decided I was going to be a scientist at that point and figure it out myself and not believe anybody.
Now, last year you presented Donnie Darko, and one of the things I thought was really fascinating was you talked a little bit about things that interested you, and you mentioned something about how you used to see faces of people, and then they would either show up at your doorstep or die. So how did that impact your science?
Well, that came later. That came when I was in my career here. I mean, certainly I'd had those experiences earlier, but it became really more urgent for me at that point because I had had this kind of feeling of mortal dread a couple of days before my youngest brother died in a motorcycle accident. And at that point, it became really more important to me to try understanding what the physical basis of this phenomena was, which some people call precognition, but I think is a form of retrocausation. So I'm interested in the whole issue of time, why it goes forward rather than backward, and under what circumstances can it appear to go backwards.
Now, for some people, the idea of physics and what a physicist does is a bit of a mystery. Mm-hmm. So is something about time travel and the way time flows, is that part of what physicists study?
Some do, most don't. Most of what we do is a little more prosaic than that. But on the other hand, things like space and time and order, these are the fundamental kinds of things that undergird everything else. So if you understand time, you understand an essential feature of almost everything in the world.
So this year you are picking the film The Matrix, the first film in that trilogy. And what was it about this film that appealed to you to want to talk about?
The Matrix is one of my favorite movies. I mean, in terms of science fiction, I would put it right up there with Blade Runner, certainly, and 2001 in terms of what it represents. And what makes it, I think, a great movie is that you can interpret it in many different ways. You can look at it from the pure action aspect of it. You can look at it in terms of romantic interests between Neo and Trinity. You can look at it in terms of basic physics. You can look at it very philosophically in terms of what is the nature of reality. There are all sorts of threads that are interwoven here, and I think because of that, it's an interesting movie. Every time you see it, you see something new in it.
And out of all those threads, is there one that appealed to you in particular?
Well, in seeing it most recently, I realized that the entire premise of the movie is about a basic misunderstanding about energy. Had it not had the robots who were trying to run the world actually understood what conservation of energy was, there wouldn't be a movie. I mean, it's all based on their flawed understanding of that. Well, the premise of the movie comes up first, right up at the beginning, so it's not a big mystery. So the movie is about humanity being enslaved within a matrix, which is a computer simulation run by artificial intelligent robots, I guess, in the future. And it's based on the idea that the human beings need to be controlled, but they're also being basically harvested for energy. And they're compared to like a dry cell battery. And the whole discussion of energy there is pretty poor to begin with. But the idea that you'd want to somehow extract energy from human beings from their bioenergy or electricity is completely dumb or flawed, because you could get more energy out of simply using the food that you're giving them to keep them alive to get the primary energy out, rather than having to use humans to do it. And so in order to subjugate human beings, they've invented an entire harvesting farm system for human beings and keep them subdued inside this computer program. But that's completely unnecessary if you actually understand how energy works and how you harvest it and use it. So once you throw that away, the whole premise of the movie crumbles and there's nothing left. And so this is actually a parable or a cautionary tale about energy, which is understand your basic physics and you won't have problems with pesky human beings anymore.
So you're saying that the aliens who came were not those super intelligent beings that we always worry about. They didn't quite grasp what they needed to do.
Well, you could say that, but on the other hand, this AI program was presumably developed by human beings in the first place, in which case they probably misprogrammed the computer in the first place, which is why we have the problem. So it's our own doing.
Now, the way The Matrix kind of depicts this computer-created reality. What do you think of that part of the film?
In most movies, I mean, one of the primary flaws with most science fiction movies is that they don't adhere well to real science in the sense. And if you look at The Matrix, it's really no different. The best movie in history, in terms of, at least in my opinion, in terms of basic science and getting the science right, was 2001: Space Odyssey. But Arthur C. Clarke was one of the guys behind that, with Stanley Kubrick. And so in that entire movie, 2001, I think I only spotted maybe one or two physical flaws, and those were inadvertent and unavoidable. But aside from that, it's first class. This one breaks physical law, both in The Matrix, where breaking physical law is part of the goal in order to get around constraints that are placed on you. But even in the real world part of The Matrix, you have basic violations of things like conservation of momentum, or angular or linear. And these kinds of things, for anyone who pays attention to it, really undercuts the movie. It could be done better. I mean, in The Matrix itself, if you want to break the laws of physics, that's fine, because it's just a simulation. But on the other hand, in the real world, if you do that, if you actually started breaking physical laws of the basic nature, like energy, momentum, and so on, you are undercutting the nature of reality, and you're going to pay for it dearly somewhere down the line.
No, you've got these two kind of extremes. You talked about 2001 and The Matrix in terms of kind of films that respect real science and films that just kind of use it as a jumping off point.
That's right.
But do both of them work in a certain way to kind of ignite imaginations of people who go to see them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the weaknesses that The Matrix has in terms of its basic science, I think, are compensated for by its mind-bending and psychological aspects. I mean, what physicists are really after, and scientists are really after, is understand the nature of reality, or nature in general. What this actually cuts into, which 2001 doesn't necessarily do maybe as well, is to question what the nature of reality is. Are we living in a computer-simulated world, for instance? There are respectable physicists who make the claim that the world as we see it is a simulation. And even people like the great John Wheeler, who was one of the great general relativists, experts on gravity and so on, mentor to Richard Feynman and so on, he used to have lots of nice aphorisms like, it's from bits, which is to say, the itness of things, the existence of things, come from their bitness, or from information. Mm-hmm. So, in a sense, information undergirds reality. And if you take that as a premise, then something like The Matrix makes more sense. And you might say that everything we experience in this world might be a simulation. I don't believe that, nor do I believe a lot of what information theorists tell us about it's from bits. I think that's just a catchy phrase, but it's built on sand. Nonetheless, I think the fact that our world is so immersed in a kind of computer technology and computer culture lends people to the idea pretty easily that maybe even what we're doing outside our Game Boy and our video games is just another game being played by someone else.
Now, we have a lot of technology around us today, which is why a film like The Matrix comes about. But this notion of what is real and what is the real world existed in literature and dating way back. So how does that kind of play into this notion of science and reality, knowing that people were questioning this all from the beginning, before we had all this technology?
Well, I think scientists need to recognize, particularly physicists, that what we're doing is basically revisiting ideas and concerns that go back to the ancient philosophers and ancient religions even. In my view, I have certain definitions of physics and what physicists are, and my definition of physics is, a couple of them is, it's mathematics with meaning, it's philosophy with mathematics, and my own personal one is a physicist is a second-rate philosopher doing third-rate mathematics. And I'm told by my friends over in mathematics that that's kind of a generous assessment in terms of the math.
Well, that description really does kind of sum up The Matrix in a lot of ways.
Why so?
Well, because The Matrix is this science fiction film, but there is like this sense of philosophy behind it, because you also get at some point the Hugo Weaving character, who is one of the agents of The Matrix, kind of obsessed with kind of very human ideas. Like he doesn't understand why humans can't be happy in the Matrix when it gave them like a good view of the world. He's confused by why do humans seem to need like pain and problems. And so it's an interesting thing because it's within this science construct, but they're dealing with very kind of human emotions and vulnerabilities and frailties, which is not necessarily what you think of.
Well, this is Agent Smith, as you're talking about, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He is developing philosophical instincts, but he's supposed to be artificially intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's true and he's sentient, then I think that's inevitable to question your own existence and the meaning of it. Human beings are further along, and I think we realize that you need to have opposites. For pleasure, you need pain. For joy, you need despair and sorrow, and so on. And these things are these opposites give meaning to each other. I think The Matrix is a reflection of that, and saying that even in the computer world, in the pure realm of logic, maybe you eventually arrive at emotion, or you're always trying to arrive at meaning. I found, seeing the movie again, that there seems to be a lot of emphasis tension between fate and free will. I mean, you have Neo, who likes to believe in his free will, and at the same time he seems fated to be the one, and the Oracle kind of leaves him hanging in the sense that she tells him one thing but actually leads him to his destiny. So that Latin phrase over the door of the Oracle, which says "Know thyself," is, I think, really key. And Neo, is his point. His journey was to find himself in this digital realm.
Smell good, don't they?
Yeah.
I'd ask you to sit down, but you're not going to anyway. And don't worry about the vase.
What vase?
That vase.
I'm sorry.
I said don't worry about it. I'll get one of my kids to fix it.
How did you know?
Oh, what's really going to bake your noodle later on is, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything?
And so it's a question of, when you make a prophecy, are you prophesying something that's going to happen, or do you make it happen by prophesying it? That comes up again really strongly, in the sense that I think at the point where Neo is about to have his plug pulled by Cypher, basically going to be executed by being pulled out of the Matrix. Cypher says, "I am going to, basically, I'm going to kill you. But if the prophecy were true, that would be impossible." And then he turns up and sees that one of the other guys on the ship suddenly zaps him with this energy beam and violates the laws of physics doing so, but that's okay. And what happens then is that you have the Oracle, which is in the Matrix, making a prophecy about something in the real world, which I think it kind of turns everything around here. Is it possible for a computer program or a computer-generated creature to make some prophecies that way? And that's so I think it was interesting to see that extension.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the film's fun to see repeatedly, because once you've seen it and hear everything that goes on, and then you go back and you see it knowing those things are happening, like, it makes you have a different view of it.
Well, that's the way I am in most movies anyway. When I first start a movie, I don't pay much attention to what's going on, and then later you start saying, oh, maybe someone said something about that. So if you don't pay attention right from the very start of this movie, because the movie's laid out very quickly, then you have to see it a second time, and then you can see all the clues were in front of you. You just didn't recognize them. That's pretty standard.
And last year when you did Donnie Darko, that a number of notions come up, because there is the notion of what's real, but also in that one there's a sense of potential time travel as well that's altering the sense of reality.
Yeah. In terms of Donnie Darko, it's much stronger in terms of that. In this movie, you have kind of lost time insofar as the Matrix is set up in the world of 1999, and now they're lost in time somewhere in the future, maybe 200 years in the future, and they don't know even what year it is really. Well, in this one, where the confusion arises is this parallel universe where you have two universes. You have what's called the real world, and then you have the digital world where most people live. And then you have the people in the real world trying to free the people in the digital world. And yet there are people in the digital world who probably really don't want to be in the real world. I mean, the character Cypher is a good example. He basically was a traitor, and he did that because he preferred irreality over reality, which is an interesting choice.
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, The Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
Then we have a deal.
I don't want to remember nothing. Nothing. You understand? And I want to be rich. You know, someone important. Like an actor.
Whatever you want, Mr. Regan.
But I'm not convinced that most people wouldn't prefer that as well. Whether they would prefer to live in a gilded cage versus an impoverished open space. And I think so it kind of leaves you on a knife's edge of morality there too. If you are going to free all of these people, many or maybe even most of which do not want to be free, are you actually doing them a service? Is it moral to do that?
More philosophy, less science in that.
Yeah.
Well, The Matrix is a science fiction film that doesn't really present us with scientists at the core. Right. Are there films where you feel scientists are well represented, or ones where the depiction of scientists is just infuriating to you?
Most of the time it's infuriating. One of the things that bothers me about a lot of science movies is how easily they get their experiments done. They have a ballpoint pen, a piece of gum, and a piece of lead pipe, and by the next morning they have a cyclotron built or something like that. It just doesn't work that way. Everything takes longer than you expect, and even if you have your best estimate of how long something's going to take, it's going to take pi times longer than that at least. It's just the way things are. Everything's harder than... You don't know how hard a problem is until you solve it, and usually it's a lot harder than you thought. But in terms of having good scientific method, I don't know, something like, it's nice to see when people try reasoning through their problems. So when you have, let's say, scientists who are, let's say, stranded somewhere like The Martian with Matt Damon, for instance, that's pretty fair in the sense that he's stuck, he's marooned, he has to use science to somehow survive, and you can see him thinking his way through the problems. There are major scientific gaffes there. For instance, the porthole he makes out of duct tape and plastic, that won't hold, that won't work. Those kind of things are crazy, just don't work. And and some things are unavoidable, like the gravity on Mars is maybe a third of that of Earth, and so things would fall differently. You don't see that sort of thing either. But on the whole, I mean, seeing someone who's in a fix and has to use his wits in a scientific way is nice to see.
And do you remember as a kid watching films that were about science that helped spur on your interest in science?
I wouldn't say it is as much the films, although because we had really kind of a limited amount of TV when I was growing up at our house. It was rather strict, 1 hour a week. But on the other hand, the Apollo program, to me, was very inspirational. The Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin came out on the moon on my birthday, or the day before my 10th birthday, and so I kind of frame my childhood in terms of that. I think a lot of people my age do.
And what is it about science that keeps you interested in it? What is it about it that makes you passionate about it?
Well, it's everywhere, for one thing. It's beautiful. It's logical. It's challenging. It's the hardest thing I can do and be half decent at, I guess. So I enjoy the challenge of it. I like the idea of being able to explore and do things that no one else has done, and contribute to a repository, a body of knowledge that hopefully will last a long time. I don't have any illusions about the fact that most of what we know now will probably be superseded by something else in the future, but what we're doing now is necessary to get there. So it's a journey. I enjoy my teaching, and I really am thrilled with the colleagues I have here at the university. So it's the whole way of life. The fact that you get paid for thinking, you get paid for teaching, I would do all of those for free. The only thing I wouldn't do for free is go to committees, meetings, which my dean knows about already anyway. So, I enjoy just the whole experience. I enjoy reading about new things. When I teach, I get to learn more than the students. Like tomorrow, I'm teaching about nuclear reactors in an upper division honors class, and I get to read a little bit more about the natural nuclear reactor that happened in Gabon about 1.5, 2 billion years ago. I mean, you'll learn about things that spur your interest, and you have a lot of intellectual freedom. That's nice, at least in the academic setting. But in terms of science, I'm a son of a university professor, so I kind of grew up in that kind of culture. So it's not new, but I'm only one of 7 kids and the only one who went into science this way. So it came fairly natural, but at the same time, I've taken my own path. But I think, being able to go out and understand why the sunsets are red and why the sky is blue and why soap bubbles have nice colors in them, and being able to understand, pretty much everything you read in the paper about science and have an informed idea about how things are going, being able to contribute to the knowledge that might be helpful to undo climate change, all of these things. I mean, it's just one way of being human, but it's one that has a certain amount of structure to it, and you have a community of scientists that share your ethos, so you have kind of a instant group of people that you can interact with. That's nice too.
And do you have a particular field of study within physics?
I've traveled around in physics a bit. I've worked I've got my PhD in plasma physics, the physics of high temperature ionized gases, and was working in basic plasma physics for the most part. I've moved into various other areas like planetary formation, nanotechnology, the physics of time, as you know, and also the foundations of thermodynamics, which is my main interest. What are the basic thermodynamic laws, and are there exceptions, particularly to the second law of thermodynamics, which is interesting in the sense that it undergirds the direction of time itself.
And by participating in programs like this, where you're taking something that's pop entertainment and kind of putting it in a context for an audience, what do you hope to gain by that, or what do you hope the audience will come away from with?
I didn't hope to gain anything by it. I mean, I just did it because someone asked. I mean, if someone asks me to do something, if I have time, I'll usually do it. If I don't have something really pressing to do, in terms of the audience, I mean, things like The Matrix the physics is not particularly good, but the fact that it's raising awareness about and questions about the nature of reality, I think, is so fundamental that it can't help but have probably some good come out of it.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Knowing thyself, and that means knowing the world too, I think, is what it means to be human. And I think the way the world is gone now, that we can be insulated from it pretty much as we want. We can live in a cocoon where we don't have to feel the coldness of the winters or the heat of the summer because we're in an air-conditioned house. We don't have to deal with people directly. We can deal with them on Skype or by telephone. We can avoid contact with people and simply play video games all day. We are constructing our own matrix, in a sense. So to question that, I think, is important. We are going in a place where human beings have never gone before as a society, and it's not clear to me whether that's going to be beneficial in the end, any more than being seduced by the matrix may seem good, but in the end you're a slave to it. So I think it's important.
So if you could choose like any film or a couple of films to share with people and say like these are films that really either get science right or that give you a window into science that you think is good. Are there a couple of films you might mention?
Well, I don't know right off the top of my head. I mean, I think I mentioned some of the ones I liked best, like Blade Runner and 2001, which I think are iconic. I don't think you guys had money for the Interstellar, but on the other hand, I think that's too recent to look at. But that has some interesting physics in it as well, which actually came up in class today when we were talking about time dilation and gravitational fields. So I think you can teach a lot of physics through film if it's done fairly well, and Interstellar was done well in many ways, not always, but in many ways. In terms of one particular film, hard to say. I think ones that are important and certain times aren't important in others. I think something like Day After Tomorrow, the physics is not all that great, but it also has an interesting message that we need to pay attention before you have some sort of flip in the climate, which in principle I suppose is possible, where you could flip into another mode of ocean circulation or atmospheric circulation, which could really carry us a long way away from something we're used to. The world's always been different. I mean, I think it's difficult. I think it's unfair in a sense for people to say, well, we're going to go back to the good old days. There were no good old days. There were just old days. When people say, you can never step into the same stream twice, you can never step into the same stream once. I mean, it's because it's always different. And so science has a way, how should I put this? Science gives us tools to make our lives better, but in the end it won't save us. It's the humanities that are going to save us. It's the ability to understand the human heart, to understand our motivations, to be compassionate to other people. The things that are humanistic are the things that ultimately matter. Science is just a means to an end. It's not an end of itself. And I think it's been deified, glorified in a way which I think is unhealthy in that respect. There needs to be better balance. And I think the movies have a way of doing that in the sense they bring the human element to bear. And so that's one of the reasons I do like science fiction movies. I mean, after all, if you take something like Blade Runner, physics is not particularly good. Even the biology is second rate maybe. But again, it goes to the very question of what it means to be human. And in the end, I think scientists yearn for that as much as anyone. Like I said, physics is just philosophy with mathematics. You can dress up philosophical ideas with math, but in the end, they're still philosophical ideas. And the most important of those are, what's the nature of the universe? What's the nature of reality? Who are we? What is consciousness? All these basic philosophical questions. And those interest me, and as a scientist, I'd like to put numbers on them.
Well, and I think the best science fiction is always the ones in which it is the humanity that's focused on more so than the science aspect of the story. It's like, how does science affect humans and the way they live as opposed to just the science itself?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, most science, the science science fiction that you see like in Star Wars is 1950s variety. It's just gosh, wow kind of stuff. There's a little bit of human element in it, but it's about lots of explosions and sound in space, which of course is impossible, and rumbling Death Stars, and again, impossible in space, and all these violations of all sorts of physical laws. But what people remember about it is Princess Leia and Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and the human aspects of that, certainly. But I think the really good science fiction, like Ursula Le Guin and so on, those blend science and humanity very well, and have more of a literary touch. That's the best kind of science fiction.
And do you ever tackle science or lack of science in comic book movies? I just saw Infinity War, so there's the whole reality stone, which can change everything, and so that's a very kind of comic book take on it.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of superhero movies, just because they're so outrageous. The laws of physics are infinitely violated, terribly violated there. And if you have an alternate universe where you simply make up a bunch of rules of your own making about what people can do and can't do, I don't find that very interesting because it doesn't have plausibility. I think some of the best science has a measure of plausibility to it. But I think when you go to that realm, it's more fantasy, which is okay. But I think science is rich enough that you can stay close to it and still have wondrous things happen. But among the superhero movies, Wonder Woman was my favorite, I think. Yeah, that one had a nice human element to it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking some time, and I look forward to hearing how you're going to present The Matrix.
I'm interested in seeing how you edit this.
That was Daniel Sheehan, physics professor at University of San Diego. Our last scientist is new to the film series, Brian Shotwell, who teaches physics at UC San Diego. Shotwell gets to present what is probably the best known and most popular of the films, Back to the Future. Here's the trailer.
Mom, is that you? I had a horrible nightmare. Dreamed that I went back in time. It was terrible.
Well, safe and sound now, back in good old 1955.
1955? Are you telling me you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean? I'm from the future. I came here in a time machine that you invented. It worked! Now I need your help to get back to the year 1985.
I finally invent something that works! You must not see anybody or talk to anybody. Anything you do could have serious repercussions on future events. Do you understand?
Yeah, well, I might have sort of bumped into my parents.
Great Scott!
Isn't he a dreamboat?
This is more serious than I thought.
Doc, are you trying to tell me that my mother has got the hots for me?
Precisely.
Brian, you are new to this real science film series that the NAT is sponsoring. So give us a little introduction to yourself. What kind of a scientist are you?
I got into science probably because of movies in high school. One movie that stands out is The Matrix, and that certainly has the sort of cult-like camp following that a lot of the movies that real science does. I was just fascinated by science fiction, the physics involved. Later, I got into Star Wars. I wasn't into it as a kid like most people, but later on, I really got into it. That was the fun side of physics, and I was also very much interested in the math part of it. So I did theoretical particle physics when I was a grad student. The research was a little tedious. I like teaching more, and so now I'm going back to the movies, the fun aspects of the science.
So this podcast is for people who love movies, not necessarily for people who love science. So explain to people what does a physicist do? What do you study, or what is it about? People probably have in their heads, what maybe a biologist does or a chemist, but a physicist is a little more unclear to some people.
Physicists are similar to biologists and chemists in that we want to construct models of how the world works, and we want to be able to explain phenomenon already seen and be able to explain new phenomenon, whereas they're concerned with coming up with new drugs that will help the human body. Physicists want to, eventually the goal is to create new technology, but we need to make progress in fundamental research in order to get to that point. A lot of the quantum mechanics studied in the early 1900s led to transistors, which led to computers. There was no way of knowing what the study of quantum mechanics was going to lead to. It was just fundamental research and interest. We do it because it's fun, not because there are any practical applications. But there tend to be practical applications dozens of years, hundreds of years after the fact.
The film you have chosen is Back to the Future, which probably in the film series is the most widely known and most easily accessible of the films. And it brings up some notions of time travel. And you've got the crazy character played by Christopher Lloyd of the Doc Brown. What attracted you to picking this particular film?
I was choosing a lot of movies that you had to think a lot about. It was just a lot of work. And this one was unique in that it was just a fun movie. But the more I thought about it, the more physics I realized was involved in the movie. I saw it at a very young age. I wasn't really thinking a lot of the physics in the film, but really, they got a lot of it right, or at least they have some words thrown around in the movie. It's a fun way of introducing a lot of physics topics like time travel. But I also, one of the most memorable parts of the film is Doc Brown, Christopher Lloyd, saying 1.21 gigawatts.
But I need a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity. 1.21 gigawatts! 1.21 gigawatts! Great Scott!
What the hell is a gigawatt?
Which I've never pronounced without being, an ironic tribute to the film in that way. But I get to talk about energy and power in addition to time travel. I get to talk about the Mr. Fusion at the end of the film. There are a couple of things that I would have liked to see done better in the film when it comes to physics. Some things when it comes to the clock tower scene come to mind. I don't know if you remember the car stalling when Marty McFly is supposed to get it up to 88 miles an hour to go back to the future in the climactic scene. But the car wouldn't start. And so, there was about a 10 to 15 second delay. And that would have had much worse consequences in real life. So it's the mundane part of the film that that the physics, that part kind of drive me crazy.
Here you have kind of your classic mad scientist in Christopher Lloyd. What does a character like that do in terms of, does a character like that have the ability to inspire people to real science?
Watching the film as a kid is very different from watching it nowadays. I see humor in that character now, whereas as a kid, it was just the stereotypical scientist character. He is a very lovable character. And so I think it does, and it doesn't make science intimidating. He's a very serious character, but at the end of the day, he has Marty McFly's interests at hand in addition to being interested in the time travel aspect of it all. Yeah, I think the characters make it fun and approachable.
Well, what I've always found appealing about the kind of the mad scientist characters in science fiction is they generally have a real passion for something. And even though the results may not necessarily be the best, I feel like there's a spark in there that can inspire people to at least think that, hey, maybe anything is possible.
Oh, yeah. I definitely got that sense from Doc Brown. And yeah, I agree that other mad scientists in other movies inspire that sort of passion and interest. This is something to be interested about.
What do you think it is about the notion of time travel that so fascinates humans? Because it's not just contemporary science fiction that deals with it, but you can go back to H.G. Wells and literature where this notion of can we go back in time and change something?
I think about it pretty often, actually. And as a kid, I did. I often wished I could go back in time and change some aspect of something that happened to me. I definitely think about that a lot more than going to the future and only to the future, right? You want to be able to modify some things in the past or relive some aspect of your life. I think that's definitely focused on in a lot of time travel films. It's interesting from a scientific viewpoint because that leads to all sorts of problems with causality, all these paradoxes that can arise. You can actually... What's interesting in physics is that you can go forward in time in some sense. One example of this is I could have a twin brother leave the Earth, come back, and have aged not as much as my twin brother who remained on the Earth. So in that sense, the world would be in the future, but it wouldn't violate any sort of causality. You can't go back in time and kill your grandfather is one of the canonical examples. But I think it's fun to imagine the possibilities in a world where you could go back in time. I think that's the widespread appeal.
Are there any other time travel films that have appealed to you or that you think tackle the subject in a good way?
One that I saw that did it in a pretty... It's difficult to use the word rigorous because it's not real time travel. But there's one movie called Primer. That's a confusing film. I mean, I've seen it multiple times and I still don't understand it. But I love the way that the movie, I can't even call it a movie, it's a film. It's very cerebral. It's a movie where you sit down and think about time travel. One, I love how the process of scientific discovery was undergone in that film or displayed in that film. I mean, it was very much some guys working in their garage and accidentally discovered time travel. And it was done in a way that it probably would be discovered in real life. Soon enough, they want to go back in time and use stock market returns to make a lot of money. Another thing that the movie did really well is unintended consequences of time travel, one thing about Back to the Future is it plays out very nicely in that, they can go back in time and perfectly correct something that went wrong and everything goes back to normal. And that would not happen. All sorts of chaotic, unintended consequences would probably happen if you were able to modify time. And that's explored in Primer in a very interesting way, I think.
Watching science fiction films or films about scientists, is there something that in particular that ever bugs you about what they consistently get wrong, or something that you really feel like, oh, why did they do that again?
Things in space. Movies have gotten better about this, actually. But movies in space used to always have explosions in space and that sort of thing, whereas there would be no sound in space. Some movies get it right and use it to their advantage. And sometimes it can be haunting, the lack of sound when all this chaos is going on in space. I feel like I don't watch science fiction films as much as a physicist should, or most physicists do. And I'm trying to think about whether that's because they irk me so much that I don't watch them, or for some other reason.
Is that a more recent trend? Because you said movies kind of inspired you into science. Did you watch science fiction a lot more as a child?
I got into it late. I was late in the game. Things like Star Wars I didn't watch until later. Really, it was things like watching my dad watch Star Trek. It was, a lot of the themes were just too sophisticated, I think, for a 6-year-old, 8-year-old.
And by presenting Back to the Future to an audience who may not be made up of scientists, what do you hope an audience might come away from after you kind of put that film in a context?
I plan on talking about energy. The 1.21 gigawatts is a power, but it related to energy. So I want to talk about that and Mr. Fusion, get a sense of how big these numbers are, and just a general appreciation for the fact that the numbers mean something and correspond to some amount of energy, which is useful in everyday life. Of course, that and time travel are the main points I want to hit at. And what could be done with time travel and what can't be done with time travel as we understand it. I think it's just fun to think about. So practical and just fun aspects of the science involved.
So you mentioned that you do tend to contemplate the notion of time travel. If you had the ability to get the financing or whatever you needed to do whatever kind of research you do, what kind of time travel most interests you in terms of some sort of practical application of it?
Oh, so we're restricted to the real world now? We can't. No. So no back in time, only.
No. All right. I take that back. If you could do anything.
If I could do anything. Okay.
Let's open the doors.
There used to be a TV show, actually, that I loved called Sliders, where they had the ability to go through. It wasn't exactly through time. It was to different worlds. But it seemed similar because a lot of times it was a world that was similar to ours. And I really loved the exploration aspect of the show. I mean, they just wanted to see what different worlds were like. And so for me, it would be going back in time and just seeing what different periods were like. Not really from a historical interest, but just curiosity. What did they understand about the world? I'd love to go back and, give them some information about the way we understand the world now and see how they react. I'd probably get killed pretty quickly, so I'd have to avoid that. Going forward in time would be interesting as well, assuming you don't go far enough that mankind has ceased to exist anymore. But I imagine that technology is going to progress pretty quickly, and seeing what's going on, would be very interesting as well.
Well, you mentioned the causal effects of things, and one notion that comes up in kind of science fiction scenarios, or what people think of is like, oh, if you could travel back in time, would you change some major historic thing in the hopes of creating a better future? Would you take Hitler out?
I used to play a video game which was based on that premise.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Command and Conquer Red Alert, where Einstein went back and killed Hitler, I believe, preventing World War II. But what happened was that Stalin became the sort of the Axis power leader. And so there was inevitably another World War II. So I think things like that might happen, you know, with, again, this comes back to, you know, the causality, but the chaotic nature of causality. You know, you're going to prevent one tragedy. Of course, yeah, you should, preventing the Holocaust, it would be a wonderful thing to do. I would imagine other things would take its place. You know, to try to avoid World War II, you might have to keep going back and
fixing
keep
one more
killing
thing.
more and more people, I guess, or fixing one thing after another. I feel like that would be an endless thing. Maybe I'm too selfish to do that. Maybe I should be devoting my life to doing that.
You said you are now teaching and that you enjoyed that aspect of science. What is it about teaching science that you enjoy and that interaction with students?
I tutored in college. I suppose that was the first time I taught. And at first, it was just nice for me to understand the material. But I think if you ask most instructors, I think some of the best experiences are those aha moments where students get it. And just seeing students not be as intimidated, because most of my students come in and they're terrified of the course, what they've heard from other people. But to get them to relax and actually go through the thought process of solving a problem and being okay with that and having their thought process gel, having the physics problem-solving approach gel with their common sense of the world. Because really that's what we're trying to get students to do, is to have what we're teaching from the textbook be common sense. And for a lot of students, they're just totally disparate areas of their mind. So anytime you see students say, oh, this makes a lot of sense, duh, how could I have thought differently? That's always a special thing to see. And we want to have those moments with more and more.
All right. Well, I look forward to what your presentation is going to be like, and we'll see you at Back to the Future.
Thank you.
That was Brian Shotwell, who teaches physics at UC San Diego. He kicks off the Real Science film series on May 4th with Back to the Future at the Digital Gym Cinema. The series then alternates between Digital Gym and the San Diego Natural History Museum every Friday in May. Thanks for listening to another episode of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. Thanks to everyone who's left a review on iTunes. That's a huge help in getting the podcast in front of more people. Coming up will be a focus on LGBT cinema as Film Out San Diego celebrates its 20th anniversary, and a discussion of witches and witchcraft in film. So, till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt or for home improvements by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Learn more at splatero.com.